Good morning.
Hello. Is it loud enough?
I don't know. Are we loud enough? Hello, we're going to start a panel.
I don't think they can hear.
Can you hear
Hey guys,
me?
hello.
Hello.
Guys, can you hear us?
Hi.
Yes, it's about to be a panel.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Are we loud? We're loud enough, right,
Can you hear
guys?
us?
I hear us.
Okay,
Yes.
great.
Okay. Hi.
Hello.
I'm Ann Friedman. I co-host a podcast called Call Your Girlfriend. I know. We are here today to talk about what it's like to transition from not being a podcaster to being a podcaster. And with me are three incredible women who have done just that. Gaby Dunn, to my direct left, is
Hello.
the host of Bad with Money. Negin Farsad is the host of Fake the Nation in the center. And Erica Williams-Simon on the end hosts The Call. I love this topic because it's a really easy answer for me of the how did you get into podcasting. Her name is Gina Delvac. She produces Call Your Girlfriend. And she's the one who planted the seed like, hey, maybe you two should think about podcasting. Hey, I have all of the technical skills and expertise that you need to make that happen. Let's work together. Most people do not have the perfect podcast witch pop into their life at the right moment. But that's my story. And I'm really excited to hear from all three of these ladies about their own paths to audio domination. So to start us off, we've got a little clip from everyone's show. And we're going to start with Gaby. On your podcast, Bad with Money, you talk about all the ways that money can affect a person's feelings, relationships, self-worth, that whole messy cocktail of stuff.
Yeah.
And here's a clip that explains your show.
Hi, I am Gaby Dunn. I am a writer, comedian, journalist, actress, YouTuber, yes, that's a thing, and sometimes Postmates courier living in Los Angeles. And I am bad with money. For most of my life, I kept all of my financial foibles to myself. Not having money was my secret. I'd build credit card debt before I'd tell a friend I couldn't cover dinner. You can pay me back whenever, no rush. I'd let months go by with unanswered invoices rather than beg a company to pay me for my freelance work. I'd sell clothes or pawn jewelry before I'd turn down an unpaid internship. Seeming desperate for money was the worst thing I could do.
Ooh, fun to relive.
So you write and make YouTube videos and do lots of different things about different topics. I want to know why this is the topic you chose for a podcast.
Yeah, I mean, our YouTube channel is mostly focused on like dating and love advice and stuff like that. And I am a queer woman, so that's kind of the topic that comes up a lot when people want to talk to me. When I was thinking about doing a podcast, so I'm with Panoply, and when Panoply approached me about doing a podcast, I was like, okay, first thought is like some sort of sex and dating thing, but there are a lot of those, and I was like, that is easy for me to talk about, but what is hard for me to talk about? And I was like, well, the big secret in my life is that I'm terrible with money. And then I was like, let's poke the wound. Let's let everyone know about that. And so like in the first episode, there's a thing that I do where I go to this coffee shop and I tell people, can I ask you 2 questions? And they go, sure. And then I go, okay, first question, what's your favorite sex position? And like without missing a beat, they're like doggy style, reverse cowgirl. The barista was like, I like standing up, whatever it is. And then I was like, cool. And second question is, how much money is in your bank account? And people were like, oh, absolutely not. Like, no, that's offensive. Which it's really happened. And so from there, I was like, okay, this is the topic that, because I was like such a sexual person, I was like, no, that's easy. This is the topic that is hard. So that's why I chose. Also, there's not a lot of queer-driven or female-driven finance podcasts. And a lot of them are like, here's exactly what you should do. And if you don't do this, you're a dum-dum. And I was like, okay, why? It's not that easy.
Awesome.
Yeah, so I just wanted to do something that was different than my YouTube channel, and also sort of unexpected from like a person who's like a queer woman who is, you're not usually the target expert for financial podcasts.
Totally. Negin, so you describe Fake the Nation as the comedy about politics without any of the politics about politics, which sounds awesome right about now, now and always. We have a clip from your show in which you and Robin find out from Rhea Butcher that Beyonce at the time, was pregnant with twins. Let's listen.
Fake the Nation, episode 31.
Can we
Hold
talk
on.
about that?
Well,
for
that's
an
good.
hour?
I'm on a group text. Wait a minute. She's pregnant again.
Yeah,
Oh
with
my
twins.
God, wait, I didn't
With
know
twins.
this. Where have I been?
I almost said this to you, but I was like, well, I feel like maybe she probably knows. But yeah, twins.
Places, please.
When did you find this out? And why
Just
am I
a
the
second
last?
ago.
Oh, okay. So
I just found out.
Okay,
Yeah.
just
She
found
just
out.
I didn't know.
I didn't know.
Oh,
First day of Black History Month.
Do you see this?
Beyonce. Yep, I sure did.
Ah.
Somebody already photoshopped it into one of the executive orders.
Holy shit. Holy shit.
Going
Holy
live
shit.
in 3,
Oh my God.
That's great.
2, 1.
Hello. I am Negin Farsad, and this is Fake the Nation, where we talk about news, we talk about politics, and we send panic signals to Angela Merkel. Today, we're going to talk about the chaos sown by the travel ban, our fraying foreign relations, and we'll figure out how to survive it all. Today, I'm rejoined. This is a...
Oh my God, never forget.
Yeah.
That happy moment of finding out. Okay, so you have a really varied background as well in
Yeah.
politics and policy, also in comedy. You've made documentaries and feature films. Did you make a calculus similar to Gaby's, where you were like, I want to do a podcast that's different from my other work, or how did it fit in?
I guess I have like just a tendency of like just career changing or whatever. Because I was a policy advisor for the city of New York, as were we all, and I then, but I had always been doing comedy or whatever. So then I threw my hat in to just do stand up, and I'm still a comedian or whatever, who occasionally makes movies or whatever, writes books. But I think the thing is that I really am I have for whatever reason I don't see a difference between medium. So I just feel like I'll probably go into mime after this. You know what I mean? I just am like, it's all the same thing. And I became really obsessed with podcasts, and there was a podcast that that's my all-time favorite podcast is Slate's Political Gab Fest, and I always thought, I want to do like a podcast like this. We talked about stealing yesterday. Someone talked about stealing and said it was okay. So anyways, I'm owning up. I was like, I want to do like this podcast, but with comedians, and we don't have to be remotely, we don't have to be adults about it. We could talk mad shit, and that's, and also have like a couple of serious topics, and mention Angela Merkel, but then we could also talk about, something, more lowbrow, in a third segment or whatever. And so that's, and so I would say to myself and occasionally to my dog out loud, this idea, until one day, Chris Bannon from Earwolf had, said to me, oh, do you have any, if you have any ideas, let me know. And I was like, I have a stolen idea. And so that's kind of how it came around. And it was just, it was purely out of the love of listening to this other podcast and having it be such a strong part of my diet.
Mm-hmm. But obviously taking that and then making it your own, taking that idea.
Yeah.
I just want to be clear, you didn't just steal
No,
it.
I didn't just. There's a lot of things that are completely different about these shows. Namely, and we're not experts. We're comedians mostly. But it is. And the other thing is, I didn't really sign up for Donnie to be my president at the time. So we started during the primaries, and I thought, this will just be like a fun, dumb part of the process. And once we get him out of the way, we can get to the real podcast. And that is, now I'm in the fucking real podcast, and he's still there. And it's, so that's one thing I didn't know. When I got into it, unfortunately.
I'm just going to move right along because Erica, your podcast, The Call, is all these amazing one-on-one, in-depth conversations with women who are following their dreams, who are taking action, who are doing like the exact opposite of, you know, everything you just said about what's happening in electoral politics right now, who are really like making it happen for themselves. Let's listen to a clip from your show.
Calling you. Hey! I'm so sorry I said hey like that. I can't help it. I'm excited. It's your girl E, and welcome to the very first episode of The Call, where we hear from inspiring women about their journey to answer their life's calling. I kind of feel like there should be bottles popping in the background, but I don't drink, so that doesn't make sense. Maybe balloons popping. I don't know, just something to celebrate you being here. Because 9 times out of 10, if you're listening, you're a person who is really trying to master your journey, to step up, to make change, to live an extraordinary life, you know, all the cliches. And if so, you're in the right place, because I am too.
Awesome. That's me.
Yeah. I want to ask you about the tone and the whole feel of that clip we just heard, but your show in general, and how you decided what you wanted that listener experience to be like, or what you wanted that feel to be like.
Yeah, so my background is actually in politics, and then also religion. I'm a preacher's kid, and in the kind of political world, I ran, you know, youth organizing programs in Washington and did all that, but also have been a media trainer for progressive faith leaders. So I've got like this weird intersection of these very serious topics. And so when I left politics and transitioned, I knew that I wanted to create content that helped people not to steal from Oprah, but live their best lives, but in like a very real way that involves politics and social impact, not just feeling good about yourself. But I didn't know what I wanted that to look like. So I moved to LA and was in the process of pitching television shows, because I'd done a lot of TV commentary and loved being on camera. And what I quickly learned was that's a very long process. Like, making shows is a long thing, and it's hard. And so you can have an idea, and it takes a year, depending upon who you're working with and what you want it to be, a year or two to actually get on air, whether that be digital or television. So I was sitting around with all these ideas of the kind of conversations I wanted to have, and I was like, well, maybe I can just do audio. I wasn't a huge podcast listener. And a friend of mine worked at a lifestyle platform called Man Repeller, which I wasn't super familiar with, but it's apparently a very, very popular, women's fashion and lifestyle platform. And they said, well, we're looking for, we'd love to start doing podcasts. And I was like, I'd love to start doing them too. And they said, let's do one. And so they didn't know what they were doing, and I didn't know what I was doing. And we sat down and they said, so what kind of show do you want to make? And immediately, and I think this is really important, immediately I went into, well, what shows are people like me making? And everyone I talked to was like, girl, you gotta do another round. You gotta do 2 Dope Queens. And I'm like, okay, love those shows, but that's not really me. I mean, with my girlfriends it is at home, but that's not really me, and that's not necessarily what my voice is in the world. And so I felt very nervous about creating the kind of content that I really wanted to create. When I listen to audio, I geek out on Krista Tippett's On Being, which is the nerdiest, most out there show. I grew up watching Charlie Rose interviews. I love going deep and getting real. And I wanted to do that with women and with women of color and have some real conversations. So I said, that's what I want to do. And they said, cool, let's do it. But I didn't know, that I needed people around me who understood my voice. So I hired just a producer, didn't know anything about what producing was or what I needed. And in producing the very first episode, I just said what I needed to say and was like, here, you take it and you make it now. And she didn't know me, so she put a bunch of stuff on and clips and music, and I got it back, and I'm like, that ain't me. That doesn't sound like me anymore. But I didn't know what to do, and it was up until the night before, there was an intro song on it that just was not my vibe. And I was like, I don't know what to do. I don't know where to find royalty-free music. So I pulled out GarageBand and made it. And that's me singing, and that's me making a beat. And I was like, let's just use that for now. Because if nothing else, it sounds like 90s R&B. Which is my vibe. That's the closest to me you'll get right now. And it worked. And people were like, we love your theme song. Who is that? And I'm like, it's your girl, E. But I say all that to say that, like, how did I find the voice and the tone of the show? I just used my own. And then you grow from there and you develop and you learn. But I didn't want to sound like anybody else because I can't sound like anybody else. Literally, I'm singing my song.
Yes.
So.
I would love to hear from each of you what was one big misconception that you had about podcasting that you quickly realized was a misconception after starting your shows.
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is the technical aspect. Like, I thought, oh, if I touch a microphone, it will break. And then we started doing the second season of so we initially did our show, we rented out like studios, and that cost money. And then for the second season, they were like, we're just gonna set up a podcast studio in your kitchen. And I was like, you're gonna what now? And so then a guy came to my house, and it was like the Karate Kid. He set up the whole thing and then took it apart, and then set up the whole thing and then took it apart. And then he was like, now you do it. And I was like, okay. And then we went through it like 4 or 5 times, and I have no background in this. And then by the end of it, I could set up the whole studio. And I was like, I could have done this the whole time if I just had the confidence to be like, no, I'll figure it out. Like, my dad, does our whole backyard landscaping. He's not a landscaper. Like, he just goes and does it. So, I was like, oh, why don't I could have just been like, I'll figure it out. So I feel like there's this barrier to entry where you're like, well, I don't know about this very serious thing. And I was like, you could just get a dash cam and figure it out.
Yeah, I was just about to ask if there is a checklist of the stuff, the what you did to set it up that's somewhere online or that.
I have a video that I made of this very nice man showing me how to set it up. I recorded on photo booth that I can put up online if people want it. But it was basically this equipment kept getting mailed to my house, and then I would just be like, But it took 2 hours for him to teach me how to do it, and now we record the whole thing out of my house, and I can in my sleep put together the equipment. And I think I was very scared to do that. And I think the idea that it's this thing that you can't, you had to go to school for or whatever, is not true. This barrier that they make you think you have because of some sort of technical skill is watch a YouTube tutorial, you can figure it out.
Other misconceptions?
I mean, for me, you don't know what you don't know.
Unknown unknowns.
Unknowns. So, I mean, if you heard in that very first clip, I'm listening now to the audio quality and I'm cringing because I just didn't know, So I had a Zoom mic and I was talking into it, and it doesn't sound great, although the interview was in a studio, so that part sounded good. But, now this season I have a wonderful producer who I think is here, Erica Morrison. She's like, yay, Erica. Yes, you should get a producer who has your same name. It makes things so much easier. But, and so now last season, we did an interview on the phone because I was like, okay, you can't come to the studio, let's do it on the phone. This season, Erica's like, we're doing ISDN only in studio. And I'm like, okay, girl, all right. And it sounds so much better. So a lot of it is almost kind of the opposite point that you were making. One is okay, you can just do it. You can pick up what you have and figure it out. But the other side of that is there are also there are women who know so much more than you who are willing to help, and there's expertise. You don't have to know it all. Someone else does.
Yeah, don't be afraid to ask for help.
Yeah.
I think, we have this particular challenge, which is that every week we bring on 2 comedians. They're usually comedians, but they're also maybe a funny journalist type person. Who can be chatty about politics. And the rule of the show, the sort of unspoken rule of the show is I want people to be fun and not assholes. And I want the thing to kind of feel just like a chatty, fun thing. You're sitting around a dinner table and you're sitting with us and we're having this conversation. And at first I just thought it would be much easier to book the people, so I know a lot of people that fit this description. I don't know it turns out nearly any Republicans that fit this description. And so I'm like, if you ever meet me, at a bar or on the way to the bathroom, I'll just be like, do you know a funny Republican? Like, I'm just always
There aren't any.
looking for funny.
They don't exist.
And they totally do exist. It's just like the bubbles of, the New York and the LA bubbles and the whatever. I don't know what's happening. I don't know why. I can't find. And
We
if you guys
rejected them.
know a funny Republican, please. And so that has been something. I know. Do you feel the desperation in my voice? And so that's something that I think has been really challenging, because you want to have, in this political climate, a conversation that doesn't alienate people, that brings people in, in which we can talk about other viewpoints and stuff like that. And so oftentimes, and this is something, again, I didn't realize I would be signing up for, I'll be like, devil's advocate, what if guns are amazing? You know what I mean? And and I'm like, find myself saying this ridiculous stuff that I hate myself, to say out loud, but there isn't someone, that can take on that role, oftentimes. And so anyway, so that's been an interesting challenge that I didn't know, that we'd be facing.
Right. And I'm thinking a little bit about what Erica said about it being your voice, literally, but also it's your voice. It's kind of who you are and what you bring to it. And to different degrees, you all share parts of your personal lives or your personal journeys. And I'm wondering how you made some of those choices about how much of yourself in your life is front and center in the podcast you make. And if you have any regrets maybe about how you've chosen that.
I mean, in the very beginning, because the premise of the show is, we started after the election, so the premise is we're in this moment when everyone, but in particular women, are kind of needing to respond to the moment and feeling this call on their lives to do something different. And for some people, that looks like an increased activism. For other people, that looks like, I know friends who are like, I gotta quit my job and do something else. So the premise is, making these big transitions in these kind of, call to action moments. So I start by talking about my own in my life and those transitions. So I'm talking about myself a lot with the guests, but I was always cautious to not do it too much, because I'm thinking, the guest is the focus. So we get halfway through the season. This first season was 10 episodes, and we get to episode 5 or 6, and I start seeing from listeners and commenters, they're like, can we hear more about you, though? Can you tell us a little bit more about you? Because I guess I reference things in shorthand. And so for the final season, for the season finale, we flipped the tables and had the editorial director of Man Repeller come on and interview me, which was an odd experience, but I was like, okay, if you want to know everything. And when I tell you, I told all my business. I mean, we had to edit some stuff out because I was like, why was I even talking about that? But the feedback that I got from what I did let be in the episode was that they wanted to hear about me. They wanted to hear about my life because the show is my voice. And so it's hard to hear someone's voice and connect with it if you don't bring all of you to the table and all of your experiences. So for me, I have no regrets and will continue to do that.
Yeah, they want to know where you're coming from, and they want to be able to, why are you the person doing this? They have to have some context for who you are. I couldn't ask people the really intense questions about money that I do if I wasn't and here's my shit too. Even when I worked as a journalist, a big part of my interviews as a journalist was I would up top, kind of as a trick, spill my guts to the source. And I would be like, look, I'm interviewing you about this crime you committed. When I was 15, I shoplifted. So whatever, you say stuff so that almost like a cop or weird, so that they're like, oh, this is my buddy. And then they will open up to you. And so I would do that on the show where I was like, what kind of, I have to say that I'm a fuck up about money because I can't just come out here guns a-blazing being like, oh, and this is what you should do, and this is how other people screw up without talking about your own screw up. So the whole first episode is I interviewed my parents, I interviewed my sister, I got in a fight with my sister on the air. We kept all of that because you need to expose yourself first before so the audience trusts who they're listening to.
It's funny because being personal on the mic is both how you kind of draw people in and in another setting how you start a cult. So it's useful in both scenarios. Just a side note.
Yeah.
Hot tip.
Pro tip for
Pro
those of
tip,
you who are
pro
in
tip.
my cult.
Rather than waste some time running a mic around, we solicited questions from you all in advance. And so I've got an incredible list of other things to ask you all. One of them, and I apologize for messing up anyone's name from the audience that I'm about to read, so that's the downside of doing it this way. Andrea July from Los Angeles asks, once you knew you wanted to create a podcast, how did you go about the show development process? Nailing down the what's it about, the weekly segments, that sort of stuff.
I had a producer at Panoply named Sam Dingman, who's a goddamn angel. And it's as much his show as it is mine. And basically, we just did a bunch of phone calls and figured out what we wanted how personal we wanted it to be and what we wanted to call it. We had a big Google Doc with ideas and sort of like what Erica was saying. I mean, collaboration was huge. You can't, even if you're doing it by yourself, like run everything by your friends. Be like, would you like this segment? Would you listen to this segment? It's trial and error. Like, how long do you think a show would be? Like, how, our first season episodes are 30 minutes. Second season is an hour because people wanted more. Like, kind of do like a test taker of, temperature taker of people around you of like, what kind of stuff would you listen to? What kind of stuff do you think would be good? Or would you like if we did a segment like this? Or even listening to other podcasts for ideas of like what kind of segments they do, like Negin said, and then just lift them. But yeah, I think if you're working, yeah, that's my whole thing. I don't know. I just think like you can get really creative with it and take temperature takers before you actually do anything.
One thing that was big for me was I wanted it to feel like we did some work on the podcast. You know what I mean? I didn't want to feel like I just recorded myself and then throw it on the line. I wanted it to feel like a little produced, even though, it's a weekly podcast. We don't actually have enough time and it's pegged to the news. And we do it every fucking week. And so we don't have the kind of time to actually do a really produced, something beautiful, like Invisibilia or whatever. This has to happen really quickly. But what are some tricks of the trade where we can make it look like we're producing, but we're really, not. And, so a lot of that was just we throwing in sound bites from our miserable ruler or, just sound bites from the week or whatever. And we do, and just the simple thing, the show is broken up into 3 segments. And at the beginning of the first segment, I always say topic number 1. And then there's a ding sound. Yeah. Greta Cohn, who helped develop the show, and John Delore, and also Gianna Palmer, who's in the audience, and our producer, everyone should be her friend. They're constantly doing these just simple sound effects. And I can't tell you, it's so weird to me. People come up to me and they say, I love the ding. I love the ding. And it's these little things that make such a, create such an audio landscape for people and also a familiar thing that keeps them, coming in. And then the other thing that I realized was I laugh a lot, and in life and on the show. And at first I was covering my mouth, no one should hear this. And then I realized no, actually everyone should hear this. This is fun, and let us, feel the joy of it, and
people want to laugh with you. Mm-hmm. They want you to say, they want you to laugh.
And laughter's infectious or whatever.
Right.
And so...
they want to feel like they're with you.
Happy.
Yeah. And it's there's that whole religion where people laugh and then they sit and laugh. So
cult stuff
religion, cult. What? Do you have something to tell us?
No, I'm just saying I stole the idea of laughter from that one religion. But anyway, yeah. So things like that created this world of the show that I think people enjoy. Hopefully.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Catherine Jaffe is from Golden, Colorado. Her podcast is called Here's the Deal. She asks, how important do you think it is for a podcast to be perfect, that's in quotes, from the start? Or can it be a learning journey where you just start doing it and refine it as you go? I have started releasing a very imperfect podcast because I'm using it to learn, and if I wait to make it perfect, I think I will get discouraged. Is it bad form to put something slightly unfinished out there at the start?
I mean, this doesn't just go for podcasting. This is anything as a creative. It's going to be imperfect. Even if you think it's perfect, it's not perfect. So just put out something. And that's the hardest thing to do, especially if it's something that you care deeply about or you're nervous. I mean, it literally is like jumping off a cliff. You just have to do it. And you'll find, I'm big on intention. You'll find that once you find your audience, or more appropriately, your audience finds you, they're very supportive. They're going on the journey with you. You can be honest about it. But also, this is the other thing I'll say. I used to, not necessarily for this podcast, but for other things I created, for the sake of being honest about the fact that it wasn't perfect, I would highlight all the imperfections, which is, I think, a thing women do, right? Like, we're very self-deprecating, like, hey, this is Erica. I know it's not perfect. My makeup doesn't look really good today. And you don't have to do that either, boo. Just do it, right? Just be it. If there are imperfections that are worth noting, someone will note them to you and you say thank you. But a lot of the times, the things that you think are horrible, the average person doesn't even know. And you're spending, 24, 48 hours a week, a month trying to fix something that isn't worth your time. And that time is valuable because the time is growth. And you don't grow until you put it out and do it.
Anyone else?
I just agree.
Y'all didn't have to apply.
Yeah,
Thank
people
you.
waste too much time on making something perfect, and it's never going to be perfect.
Yeah, and once you're doing it, like I was telling these guys backstage, I used to spend hours and hours and hours prepping the show, and I was like, I can't do this I actually am a person who this is not my sole source of income. I actually have to go places and perform and do other work. And so I couldn't be spending the kind of time I was spending in the first weeks of the show, like prepping. And then I realized what, a 13-minute segment really means and like how much research it really entails. So like over time, I developed a way to phone it in a little bit more, is what I'm saying. My inspirational message is don't work that hard. No, but no, but like you figure out, you calibrate and you figure it out.
Yep. Right. Here's another process type question. Holly Starley from Santa Barbara, California asks, Holly's podcast is called We the Village. She says, this is a broad question on management. More air quotes, management. I'll start by stating the obvious. Producing a podcast takes a lot from many different angles, especially if you're flying solo. Any advice on managing your time, your energy, your expectations, all those sound files? Planning, management tips.
Google Calendar is really great. And I have my Google Calendar is shared with my producer, which is a nightmare because now we have no boundaries, and he's just like, "Did you get a wax today?" It's very unfortunate. But yeah, but I think like it's making sure that you're not doing too long of interviews. Like that's a big thing for me, is my show's only an hour and we usually talk to 2 or 3 people per show. And so I was like, well, I felt bad. Weirdly, I felt bad. Like if these people are taking the time to do this interview, I should interview them for at least 45 minutes, but for a thing that we're only going to cut into 15 minutes or less. So then I started being like, oh, nobody's going to be upset if you hang up early. So then I was like, if the segment's only going to be 15 minutes, let's keep the interview to 30 minutes. Like just realizing, and that took me like a whole season to figure out. Right. And that saves me a lot of time.
Oh, and this goes back to like figuring out how much you need to prepare. Like my therapist explained to me that I over-prepare. And it's a very female quality, so hey, all you over-preparers, stop doing it. That like, and she was like, your idea of under-prepared is probably over-prepared for like the average person who is a man. So you should stop working so hard. Like, I think that's part of it, is like realizing that you don't have to work like that as hard. It's an ongoing issue, especially if you're like the children of immigrants, hey, and you're like expected to whatever, be amazing. But like as an adult, you're like, Mom, I'm still bringing home straight A's, but like you're like at 35, you know what I mean? It doesn't make sense. But anyway, that's still how I behave. I'm going to tell my mom all about this conference. Okay.
The only other thing that I would say, which again, I mean, I'm learning podcasting is like life, all creative projects, that these lessons kind of translate to other areas of your life, but is understanding what is important to you. You have to make a decision. You have to prioritize. So when I was, doing the first season of the podcast, it was also my really, I consider it my first year as a full-time independent creative. I'd been doing so many other side hustles for years and years, and a lot of people thought I was full-time creative, but I wasn't. That year was, and I realized I was constantly working. Brain never stopping. And any of you who are independent or who are doing multiple things at once understand what that is like. It's a grind, and you feel like you never turn your brain off, and everything is of equal importance, but it can't be. It just can't be. And that was the biggest lesson that I learned. And I would recommend, there's a book called Deep Work by Cal Newport. It has changed everything about the way that I work. Because you have to understand and think about, of all these things that I want to accomplish in the world and all the content that I want to create and all these big goals that I have, what is essential for me to do that? Not what would be nice, not what's helpful, not what do I dream about, but what of my skills, my talent, my craft is essential on my calendar, and then what is not. And then prioritizing that and scheduling your day, your week, and your life around that. How can you actually go deep? As much as it's fun for me to spend, 10 days obsessing over a logo, what's important for me is to have the best interview possible. So I need to spend more time developing my craft as an interviewer. I need to spend more time researching my subjects than I do worried about my logo, when I have to make those trade-offs, right? Which I think a lot of us do. So I would just say understanding what your priorities are and what is absolutely essential will help you clear off some of the things that take up a lot of your time and may have little impact.
Yeah, I love that.
Life advice.
Before we end, I definitely want to ask everyone here something that's perhaps a little on the nose for the title of this session, but if you could time travel back to episode 1 of your podcast, what is the advice that you would give yourself? And for me, this is an interesting one. One of the things, we were talking about this before the session, is just being like, have you considered doing seasons instead of just producing every single week in perpetuity? Or have you thought about different ways to be consistent in the long term with some structure? Because I think that for us at the beginning, it was we have to commit to doing it forever. Otherwise it'll I don't know, the audience will disappear or we'll lose momentum or something like that. And so I really wish that I could kind of plant the idea really early on that it doesn't have to be something that you do every week or every other week or every month indefinitely. It could be maybe a short run, or it could be a series model, or something that allows for the true long term. Maybe it wouldn't have been effective on day one, but just a seed to plant. So I'm curious, maybe you've already mentioned something that's in this vein, so don't feel like you need to, come up with a brand new thing. But I am curious if you could be in front of your day one self.
I think different types of guests would have been helpful. Season 1, a big criticism for season 1 was that it was a lot of show business guests. And I totally hear that. And I think that's a flaw that a lot of podcasts have, where because we're all entertainment people, or we're all comedians, or we're all sort of in some way or another, we believe ourselves to be entertaining. Otherwise, why are we talking into a microphone? We want to have other people who are just purely, and we only know other people in entertainment. So a lot of my guests season 1 are, actors or comedians or other types of people like that. And then that's only one sort of financial experience in some ways. So then for season 2, it became way more some guy in the Midwest, and then my friend's dad, and then all these various different people, and that was way better. And I think a thing I would tell myself is look outside your circle for guests, or look outside your circle for people to have on, and be a little bit uncomfortable with the conversations you're having, rather than just booking who you know and being terrified of anyone you don't know coming on.
I would have, you kind of said this, I would have been lady, you need some weeks off. You need to figure that shit out. And it's, especially, because I have to, every week talk about popular vote losing minority president Donnie Twimp, who's also under criminal investigation. I can't handle it all the time, and so and this is something, we're on episode 65 and still don't have like an exact plan for what we do when I need to not be there for a week, so that's something that I wish I had started thinking about much sooner. Build in a little bit of a sanity model.
The sanity model, I love that.
I love that sanity model. I've already mentioned having a producer that understands you and understands your voice. I guess the other thing that I've learned is when you're creating something, think about the one person that you want to reach. Think about one person. We live in a society where we've been taught that mass is better and mass is best, and so we all want to be the next big, huge thing, whatever that is. We all have a vision of, maybe we don't, but a lot of us have a vision of I'll make this podcast and it'll become the #1 ranked podcast on iTunes, and then someone will see it and buy a television show from it. And then I'll sell a best-selling book from it, and maybe I can live off of this. And all of that is wonderful, and kudos to you if it happens. But that the goal, when I stepped back and realized that my fear and anxiety over how am I going to reach so many people, that ended the day I was like, but I'm just trying to reach one. I'm trying to reach one person, and if one woman hears this show and afterwards feels, more compelled to take a step in her life, if after listening to this show, one woman feels like, you know what? I have what I need to actually take action and do something bigger than I thought, and I know the real about how to do that, then I am successful. And so I think creating your own metrics of success that have nothing to do with numbers, that have nothing to do with things that are beyond your control, that's my sanity model. And I think it also is a model for having a really effective and impactful piece of content.
Yes.
And if you can get one more person to join your cult, then you have really done something with your life.
Yeah, alternate title of this panel, Cult Leadership 101.
Cult Leadership 101. 101.
So I want to thank Gaby, Negin, and Erica for being here.
Yay!
And so you all know, next up on this main stage, there is a session about scoring music for your podcast. Are you also leading that one?
I should go to it to listen.
About how to do it well and how to do it without breaking the law. Great. And thanks for everyone. Thanks for being here.
Thank
Thanks
you.
all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.